The kitchen smelled like fresh coffee and burnt toast when Victoria decided to tell her husband. She stood at the counter, scrolling through her phone with one hand while cradling a mug with the other, the morning light casting long shadows across their modest suburban home. It was a Tuesday, ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of day when life-altering moments often arrive disguised as small talk. "James, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone people use when they're trying to sound casual but aren't quite succeeding. "My boss wants me to go to the Phoenix conference next month. It's a 3-day thing for the marketing team." James looked up from his laptop, where he'd been checking emails before heading for work. At 39, he still had that boyish quality that had attracted Victoria 12 years ago. Warm, brown eyes, a quick smile, the kind of face that suggested he saw the best in people. He'd always been trusting, maybe too trusting. "That sounds great," he said, genuinely pleased. "You've been wanting to get more involved in the strategic planning side of things, right? This could be good for your career." "Yeah, that's what I thought too," Victoria replied, and there was something in her voice, a hesitation, a thickness, that James almost caught. Almost. But he was already reaching for his coffee, already moving on mentally to the conference call he had in 20 minutes. What Victoria didn't mention was that her boss, Marcus, had suggested they fly out a day early. "We could do a working dinner," he'd said, his hand briefly touching her shoulder, in that way it always did. "Get ahead on the presentation. Maybe explore the city a bit. You've never been to Phoenix, right?" She'd laughed it off in the moment, called it innocent in her own mind. Just work. Just professional development. Just two colleagues spending extra time together because they had so much in common. The same sense of humor, the same frustrations with upper management, the same late nights in the office that had stretched into something neither of them quite acknowledged, but both of them felt. The truth was far more complicated than Victoria had allowed herself to examine. Over the past 8 months, something had shifted between her and Marcus. It had started subtly, lingering glances in meetings, conversations that ran longer than necessary, jokes that felt like private exchanges, even in crowded rooms. Then came the touches, a hand on her back as he passed her desk, fingers brushing hers when they reached for the same document, the way he leaned close when explaining something, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Victoria had never crossed a clear line. That's what she told herself. They'd never kissed. They'd never been truly alone in any compromising way. But the emotional intimacy had grown into something that felt dangerously real. When Marcus texted, she responded immediately. When James talked about his day, she found herself half listening, wondering what Marcus was doing, if he was thinking of her. She had begun to fabricate small moments. A fake work drinks with colleagues that was really just Marcus and her at a bar downtown, talking until midnight about dreams and disappointments. A supposed team lunch where she'd actually sat across from him in a quiet restaurant, their knees almost touching under the table. Each deception had made the next one easier. Each lie a small brick in a wall between her and James. "When would you go?" James asked now, pulling her back to the present moment. "Next month, the 14th through the 17th, Victoria said. She had rehearsed this answer. She had made it sound offhand. "It's mandatory for senior marketers." "That's perfect timing," James said, smiling at her. "You've been wanting to get more involved in the strategic planning side of things, right? This could be good for your career." "Yeah, that's what I thought too," Victoria replied, and there was something in her voice, a hesitation, a tightness, that James almost caught. Almost. But he was already reaching for his coffee, already moving on mentally to the conference call he had in 20 minutes. The guilt hit her then, sharp and sudden, like she'd been slapped, because James was being so supportive, so genuinely happy for her, and she was lying directly to his face. Not just about the trip, but about who she was, what she wanted, what she was considering.
When James left for work 20 minutes later, kissing her forehead as he always did, Victoria sat alone in the kitchen and felt the weight of her own duplicity settle over her like a heavy blanket. She told herself it would be fine. She told herself she could go to Phoenix, spend 3 days with Marcus, figure out what this thing between them actually was, and then come home and decide what to do about her marriage. She told herself a lot of things that morning. She didn't know that James had seen the text message that arrived after he left, not the content, but the sender. Not Marcus, but saved in her phone as MJ in a way that felt deliberately obscured. Not the first time he'd noticed small inconsistencies, little changes in her behavior, the way she had started sleeping on her side of the bed instead of curled against him. What Victoria didn't know was that her husband, quiet and steady and perpetually optimistic, had begun to sense that something was very wrong. And unlike most men, James didn't ignore his instincts. He started paying attention. He started noticing everything.
The weeks leading up to the trip revealed a woman James barely recognized. Victoria had always been organized, but now she was obsessive, checking her appearance constantly, changing outfits multiple times before leaving the house, staying late at the office with explanations that didn't quite add up. When James suggested they spend time together, a movie night, a weekend hike, she had excuses ready. Work was demanding. The conference was stressing her out. She was tired. The distance between them had grown so gradually that James could pinpoint almost every moment it widened. There was the night she'd gone out with the girls and came home smelling like expensive cologne. The morning he'd woken to find her asleep in the guest room, claiming her neck hurt. The way she flinched now when he touched her, as if his hands belonged to a stranger. James wasn't stupid. He'd been married for 12 years. He recognized the signs of infidelity from friends' experiences and movies, but he never thought he'd see them in his own home. Not with Victoria, not with the woman he'd chosen to build a life with. But denial only lasted so long. It started with curiosity. One evening, while Victoria was in the shower, James sat on their bed and picked up her phone, which he'd left on the nightstand. His heart hammered against his ribs. He hated himself for doing it, hated the invasiveness of it, but he had to know. The password was his birthday, 051286. It always had been. That broke his heart a little, that she'd never changed it, never even thought to. He scrolled through her messages. Most were mundane, work emails forwarded to her phone, texts from her sister, a group chat with friends. Then he found it, a thread labeled simply MJ. The messages deleted, but recoverable through the phone's recently deleted folder. Can't stop thinking about you, one read. This is crazy, another said, but I don't want it to stop. And then, Phoenix is going to change everything. We both know it. James sat on the edge of their bed, the bed where he'd made love to this woman, where they had planned their future, where she'd cried when her father died, and felt something inside him crystallize into cold certainty. She wasn't just emotionally invested in someone else. She was planning something. Something bigger than stolen moments and guilty texts. He deleted his search history carefully, put the phone back exactly where it had been, and went downstairs to pour himself a drink. His hands shook as he held the glass. Over the next 2 weeks, James became someone he'd never been before, a man collecting evidence like a detective. He noted when Victoria's mood lifted after reading a text. He listened to her phone calls, learning to recognize Marcus's voice on the other end, even when she kept the words vague and professional. He tracked her location, using the shared Find My Friends app she'd forgotten they had active. On 3 occasions, he saw her phone place her at the downtown Marriott for 2-hour blocks of time she'd claimed were at the office. The worst part wasn't the physical betrayal he suspected was happening. It was the erosion of everything he thought was real. Every compliment she'd ever given him now felt like a lie. Every moment of intimacy was recontextualized through this new lens of infidelity. Had she been thinking of Marcus when she had said she loved him? Had she been calculating how to slip away when they'd made plans? James considered confronting her. He played out the scene in his head 100 times, but each time he stopped himself. He needed to know everything. He needed to understand not just what was happening, but why. And he needed leverage, hard proof that no one could argue with, no explanations could soften. So he waited. He acted normal. He kissed her goodbye in the mornings and smiled when she came home. He listened to her talk about nothing and responded at all the right moments. He was an actor in his own life, and the performance was exhausting. The night before her flight to Phoenix, Victoria seemed almost giddy.
She packed carefully, trying on different outfits, obsessing over which shoes to bring. She showered and did her makeup with the kind of attention she hadn't paid to herself in months. James watched from the bedroom doorway, and it felt like looking at a stranger. "You seem excited," he said carefully. Victoria froze for just a moment, then turned to him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's an important conference, and I haven't been away in so long. I think I need this." The lie hung between them like a physical thing. "I love you," James said quietly, testing the words, seeing if she'd crumble. She hesitated, a half-second too long. "I love you too," but they both knew she was lying. James went to bed early that night, while Victoria stayed up finishing her packing. He lay in the dark, listening to her move around the house, and made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow, while she was on that plane with Marcus, James was going to do something that would make it impossible for her to hide anymore. He wasn't going to confront her in Phoenix. He was going to wait until she was committed, until she felt safe, until she truly believed she had gotten away with her deception. And then he was going to demolish every lie she had constructed.
Victoria's flight left at 6 a.m. James had insisted on driving her to the airport, a gesture of normalcy that felt like a knife wound. She'd kissed him goodbye in the departures area, and he'd watched her walk towards security, her overnight bag slung over her shoulder, her entire life about to implode. James waited until her plane took off, then he drove not home but to his office downtown. He had work to do. Marcus's wife was named Elena. James had met her twice at company functions, a quiet woman with tired eyes and 2 young children. It took him less than an hour to find her number through the company directory in her Facebook page. His hands shook as he dialed. "Mrs. Winters? Elena?" he said when she answered. "My name is James Chen. I'm sorry to call you out of the blue, but I think you need to know something." There was silence on the other end. Then, "What is this about?" "It's about your husband and my wife. They're on a plane to Phoenix right now. They booked separate hotel rooms, but they're very obviously planning to spend those 3 days together. I have screenshots of their messages. I have proof of meetings, and I think you deserve to know." More silence. He could hear her breathing, the sound of her processing, the moment her world shifted. "I'll send you everything," James continued. "But I also want to suggest something. Your husband doesn't know that you know. Mine doesn't know that I know. What if we coordinated? What if when they landed, they found that we already knew? What if we stopped pretending and forced them to stop lying?" Elena's voice, when she spoke again, was hollow. "He's been different. For months. I kept asking myself what I'd done wrong." "You didn't do anything wrong," James said. "They did." The plan came together in the next hour. Elena called her cousin who lived in Phoenix and explained the situation. The cousin agreed to help. James booked the same hotel as Marcus and Victoria in a different room. He called the hotel and spoke to the manager, explaining that he was concerned about an affair taking place in their establishment and that he had legitimate reason to document it. The manager, uncomfortable but sympathetic, agreed to assist. James spent the afternoon gathering everything he had: the screenshots, the timeline of fabricated meetings, the location data. He created a file on his laptop with photographs and messages organized chronologically. He sent copies to himself, to Elena, and saved one to a USB drive. Then he did something that surprised himself. He called his therapist, someone he'd seen individually after his father's death 5 years ago. He explained the situation, asked for guidance on what came next, on how to handle the impending conversation with Victoria. The therapist listened and then asked the most important question. "Do you want to save this marriage, James, or do you want out?" James realized he didn't know the answer. The flight landed at 2 p.m. Phoenix time. James's flight was landing in Phoenix at 3:15 p.m. on a different airline, which gave him time to get to the hotel before Victoria and Marcus could settle in. He had booked the room directly across from theirs. At 4:47 p.m., he watched from the hallway as Victoria and Marcus arrived at the elevator together. Marcus's hand was on the small of Victoria's back. She was laughing at something he'd said, a laugh James recognized. It was the laugh she used to use with him before things fell apart. They went up to the 6th floor,
Room 612, according to the keycard information Elena's cousin had carefully obtained from the front desk. James went to his room, 611, and waited. He had requested it specifically for its view of the hallway. He had his phone set to record, a camera angled toward their door. He wasn't going to see them together. He didn't need that pain. That image burned into his memory. What he needed was documentation that they were together. At 5:30 p.m., the doorbell in their room rang. James heard Marcus open the door, heard room service roll in the dinner he had ordered. Through the peephole, James caught a glimpse of Victoria in a red dress, her hair down, makeup perfect. She looked beautiful and foreign and like everything he had never wanted to see. He heard muffled conversation, laughter, the clink of glasses. He imagined them toasting to what came next, to their future, to freedom from their spouses. At 6:15 p.m., Elena called James. "My cousin spoke to the hotel staff. They need to know what's happening. The security guard is a mutual friend. He's willing to help us. Are you sure about this?" "Yes," James said. He was certain. He was also numb. He said he's going to go to their room at 7 p.m. He's going to say there's a maintenance issue that requires them to let him check the room. When they open the door, my cousin will be outside with a camera. When they see that they've been caught, we're going to be in the lobby with copies of everything. James listened to the plan and felt like he was observing his own life from outside his body. This wasn't real. This wasn't happening. This was something that occurred in other people's marriages, not his. At 6:58 p.m., there was a knock on room 612. James watched through the peephole as Marcus opened the door, confused. The security guard explained the situation professionally. Victoria appeared behind Marcus, and even from this distance I could see the moment they both realized they'd been caught. The security guard let them know that the hotel was aware of the situation and that they had visitors waiting in the lobby.
The lobby of the Phoenix Marriott was a neutral space, all marble and modern furniture, designed to facilitate transitions but never confrontation. It was the worst possible place for a marriage to end, and yet there they were. Victoria saw James first. She was walking toward the elevator with Marcus, both of them still processing what had happened upstairs, still thinking perhaps they could minimize, explain, escape. Then she saw him sitting in one of the leather chairs near the entrance, and her entire body went rigid. "James?" Her voice was barely a whisper, as if saying his name aloud might make the betrayal more real. "What are you doing here?" Before he could answer, Elena stepped out from where she'd been waiting near the restaurant entrance. She looked directly at Marcus, and the expression on his face shifted from confusion to panic to something that might have been shame. "I think we should find somewhere more private to discuss this," James said quietly. He had a key to a small conference room off the lobby that Elena's cousin had arranged. He gestured toward it. "I don't understand," Victoria said, but she was starting to. James could see it happening in real time, the moment realization dawned that this wasn't a coincidence, that they had been anticipated, that every lie she'd told had been documented and verified. In the conference room, the four of them sat around a table designed for business meetings, not marital implosion. James opened his laptop and turned it toward Victoria and Marcus. There, in chronological order, was their affair. Not the physical evidence he'd initially feared having to show, but something almost worse, the gradual erosion of boundaries, the pattern of deception, the deliberate choice every single day to betray the people they'd promised forever to. Victoria stared at the screenshots of messages she'd thought were private. Her face went white. "How did you—" "It doesn't matter how," James said, and his voice was steady in a way he didn't feel. "It matters that this is happening, that you chose this, and now we all know about it." Marcus began to speak. "Look, this got out of hand. We never—" "Did you sleep with her?" Elena asked sharply. Her voice was ice. Marcus didn't answer, which was answer enough. Victoria made a sound, not quite a word, not quite a cry. It was the sound of someone watching their own life collapse and realizing they'd done the collapsing themselves. "I want to know why," James said, looking at Victoria.
Not angry, not yet, just hollowed out with curiosity. I want you to explain to me why you chose to throw everything away. And I want you to understand that I know you have reasons. I know our marriage wasn't perfect. I know things changed. But Victoria, we could have talked about that. We could have gone to therapy. We could have done anything except this. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. I don't know how to explain it. Try, Elena said. Victoria took a shaking breath. Marcus made me feel seen. You and I, she looked at James, her voice breaking, we fell into a pattern. We stopped trying. You were always at work or at the gym or planning the next thing. You looked at me like I was part of the furniture. And then Marcus came along and he listened to me. He laughed at my jokes. He made me feel like maybe I was still interesting, still capable of making someone feel something. James felt that land like a punch, because some of it was true. He had stopped trying. They both had. But instead of fixing it, they'd just let it rot from the inside out. And when did you decide that meant lying to me for 8 months? He asked quietly. That's not what I decided. I didn't decide anything. I just let things happen. And then one decision led to another, and before I knew it, I was a person I didn't recognize, someone who'd become really good at lying. Someone you'd become? James repeated. Victoria, you made yourself into that person. Every lie was a choice. The conference room fell silent except for the sound of Victoria's breathing, ragged and shallow. Elena spoke up then, looking at Marcus. I want you to move out tonight. I'll have divorce papers drawn up. We can do this civilized or we can do it ugly, but we're going to do it. Elena, Marcus started. Don't, she said. Her voice was absolutely final. Don't try to explain. Don't try to tell me you made a mistake. We have 2 children at home. 2 children who deserve a father who makes choices that don't involve betraying their mother. So you're going to pack a bag, get a hotel room in a different city, and we're going to talk to lawyers on Monday. Marcus nodded slowly, seeming to age 10 years in the span of a few seconds. James turned back to Victoria. I think I need to leave, he said. I think I need time to figure out what I want, what I need, and whether any of that can exist with you anymore. James, please. Victoria reached across the table. We can fix this. We can go home and... We can't fix this yet, James said. He picked up the folder with all his evidence, the proof of 8 months of deception. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to stay here. You're going to cancel any plans you have for the rest of the trip. And you're going to go home tomorrow and think very hard about what you did and why you did it. And what about us? Victoria's voice was small, broken. I don't know yet, James said. Honestly, I truly don't know. But I do know that I can't make that decision right now. Right now, I just feel like someone woke up and realized the woman he fell asleep next to last night was a stranger. And I need time to decide if I want to know her or if I just want to move on. He stood up, and both women stood as well. Elena put her hand on her husband, and even in this moment of catastrophic failure, there was something almost gentle about the gesture, the recognition that they'd built a life together, and even though it was ending, some part of her hadn't completely let go of the man he'd been before he became the man who could do this. I'm going to stay at a different hotel tonight. I'll fly home tomorrow. I suggest you do the same, Victoria. And when we're both home, we can figure out what comes next. He walked toward the door, then paused. Without turning around, he said, You know what the worst part is? I would have forgiven you if you just told me something was wrong. I would have fought for our marriage. I would have gone to therapy, changed jobs, moved to a different city if it meant keeping you. But you didn't give me the chance. You just lied. Every single day, you chose a lie over a conversation. And then he left, leaving Victoria alone with the wreckage of her choices and the knowledge that some decisions can't be undone.
3 months later, Victoria sat in a therapist's office, her own this time, the one she'd finally agreed to see. The office was beige and calming, designed to make difficult conversations slightly less difficult. It wasn't working. "Tell me about the last time you spoke to James," Dr. Miranda said, her pen poised over her notepad. Victoria had been coming here weekly for 8 weeks. She'd finally begun to understand how she'd gotten to Phoenix, but understanding and fixing were two very different things. "He came by the house to pick up some of his things last week," Victoria said. Her voice had become quieter in these months, as if speaking used up more energy than she had available. "He still looks at me like he doesn't quite recognize me, like I'm someone he knew once but can't quite place now." "How does that make you feel?" "Like I ruined everything," Victoria said, and the honesty of it exhausted her further. "I had a good marriage. Not perfect, but good. A man who loved me, who showed up, who tried. And I threw it away because I was bored and because someone else's attention felt novel and exciting." She'd spent these 3 months understanding what James had been trying to tell her that day in the Phoenix hotel. Her affair hadn't been about something wrong with James. It had been about something broken in her. A restlessness she didn't know how to fix. A need for external validation that was never really about Marcus or any man. It had been about her own dissatisfaction with her own life, projected onto someone who seemed to offer an escape. Marcus had moved back in with Elena while they worked through their own crisis, trying to salvage their marriage for the sake of their children. They were seeing a couples therapist too. Last Victoria had heard through the grapevine at work, they were making slow progress. Elena had thrown him out again twice when she'd caught him texting women in bars. She'd been slowly, painfully learning to trust him again, or learning to accept that she probably never would, but that divorce and upheaval wasn't the answer they both had initially thought. Marcus had moved into an apartment across town. He'd hired a divorce attorney, then suspended the proceedings while they both figured out what they actually wanted. He'd started dating casually. Nothing serious, nothing that looked like he was trying to replace what they'd had, just testing the waters of being single again. When Victoria had asked him if he hated her, he'd been honest. "I'm trying not to. I'm trying to remember who I loved before this happened. But sometimes I look at you and I feel this anger that's so big I don't know what to do with it. So no, I don't hate you, but I'm not sure I like you very much right now." That sentence hurt more than any amount of yelling could have. "James sent me an email," Victoria told her therapist now. "He wanted to meet for coffee next week. He says we need to make a decision about the marriage, whether we're actually trying to fix it or whether we're just prolonging the inevitable." "What do you think?" Dr. Miranda asked. "I think I don't deserve his effort. I think what I did was unforgivable, and I think maybe the kindest thing I could do is let him go." "Do you believe that's what you should do, or is that what you think he deserves?" the therapist pressed. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. I'm not sure I know the difference anymore. I spent so long lying that I'm not sure I can recognize what's true anymore." The coffee meeting happened on a Saturday morning at their favorite cafe, the one where they'd had their first official date 15 years ago. James arrived early, ordered 2 coffees the way they both liked them, and waited. Victoria walked in, and the sight of him, the familiar slope of his shoulders, the way he pushed his hair back when he was nervous, hit her like grief. He'd become someone she knew and didn't know all at once. They'd grown far apart in these months. The distance of betrayal created a chasm that was wider than miles. "Hi," she said, sitting across from him, not next to him. Never next to him again unless things fundamentally changed. "Hi," he said back. He looked tired. This had aged him too. They sat in silence for a moment, sipping coffee, the smell of the cafe grounding them to something normal and everyday when everything about this conversation was anything but. "I've been thinking a lot about what I want, about what I need, and I've realized that I actually don't know anymore. 6 months ago, the answer was simple. I wanted my wife back, the person I thought I knew. But that person doesn't exist. You're someone else now. And I need to figure out if I'm willing to get to know who that person is." "I don't blame you if you're not," Victoria said quietly.
I know you don't, but that's actually part of the problem. You're not fighting for this. You're just surrendering. And I need to know if that's because you don't think we're worth saving or because you think I'm too angry to forgive." Victoria felt tears slide down her cheeks. "I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know what I'm capable of. I lied to the person I loved most in this world for 8 months. How do you come back from that? How do you trust yourself again after that?" "I don't know," James said, and he reached across the table and, after a moment's hesitation, took her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her in months. Victoria looked up at him through the tears, and when his eyes met hers, she saw something new. Not anger, but something softer. Something that looked almost like understanding. "I do know," James said, "that the Victoria I fell in love with was capable of honesty and loyalty and growth. I know that because I saw it for 12 years. And I know that the Victoria who made choices in Phoenix, that's not the real you either. That's who you became when you stopped checking in with yourself." "So what are you saying?" Victoria asked, hope and fear warring in her voice. "I'm saying I'm willing to try, but not right now, and not without conditions. I think we both need more time in therapy. I think we need to have hard conversations about what we've both been ignoring in our marriage. And I think we need to rebuild trust from the ground up, knowing that it's going to take years, not months." "Years?" Victoria repeated. "If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. And that means there's no rushing back to normal because normal didn't work for us. We have to build something new, something intentional, or we let it go." Victoria nodded slowly. "I can do that. I want to do that." They sat together for another hour, not talking about much, just being present in a way they hadn't been in a long time. Eventually, James had to leave. He had plans that afternoon, a friend's dinner that he'd committed to. Victoria understood that he wasn't going home with her, that they weren't going to slip back into their old patterns. As he stood to leave, he leaned down and kissed her forehead. Not a romantic gesture, but something more like forgiveness, or maybe just the beginning of it. "Take care of yourself," he said. "Please, really take care of yourself." "You too," Victoria replied. That evening, Victoria sat alone in the house they'd picked out together, surrounded by years of memories, and she felt something that wasn't quite peace, but was maybe the beginning of acceptance. She'd destroyed something precious and broken, and she was going to spend the next years, maybe the rest of her life, trying to understand why and how to ensure she never did it again. Marcus had sent her a message through work. He'd left his job. He and Elena had decided that part of saving their marriage meant removing the constant temptation and reminder of infidelity. He was taking a lower-paying position at a different firm. He was going to see his children every day and try to prove to Elena that he could be faithful, present, and genuinely invested in their life together. She wondered if he was having similar revelations, similar reckonings with himself. She wondered if Elena would ever truly forgive him, or if they'd just build a life together that was marked by the scar tissue of betrayal. She'd never know. Marcus and her connection was built on deception and excitement and the thrill of transgression. It turned out that what she'd thought was love was just the feeling of being wanted by someone new. The real love, the hard love, the daily choosing, is what she'd thrown away with James. 3 months later, Victoria moved back into their bedroom, though James took separate space. 6 months after that, they began to spend nights in the same bed, not sleeping together yet, just existing in the same space with intention. A year later, they took a vacation together. Not romantic, just two people trying to remember who they'd been and who they might become. It wasn't the ending anyone would have written for their love story, but it was honest, and it was hard-won, and it belonged entirely to them, both the beautiful parts and the broken ones that had taught them something essential about themselves and each other. Years later, Victoria would tell people that the worst thing that ever happened to her marriage actually saved it. Not because infidelity is good, but because it forced them to stop sleepwalking through their commitment and to actually choose each other, consciously and deliberately, every single day. James would say something different. He'd say that he learned the difference between forgiving and trusting, and that they were not the same thing. That you could forgive someone's betrayal and still choose to build something new with them, but you had to go in with eyes open, understanding that the person you were rebuilding with wasn't the same person you'd been before. They never returned to who they'd been, but they became something else. Something tempered by pain and shaped by the deliberate choice to keep going, even when staying was harder than leaving. In the end, that was more honest than any of them had done before.